Your species fights manually? The Xyntharian general's crystalline face fractured in what Lieutenant Sarah Morrison had learned to recognize as their version of shocked disbelief. As in, with organic appendages? Well, yeah, Sarah shrugged, adjusting her combat armor. How else would we fight? The general's crystalline matrices rearranged themselves in growing alarm. With automated combat units. Like every other civilized species in the galaxy. You mean to tell me that the legendary human special forces actually consist of meat? Okay, first of all, we prefer organic beings, Sarah corrected, trying not to laugh at the general's distress. And second, yeah, we're all meat. Well, mostly meat. Jenkins over there has a synthetic knee, but that's just because he tried to backflip off a tank. It seemed like a good idea at the time, Jenkins called from where he was doing pre-combat stretches. Besides, the new knee makes a great party trick. Watch this. He proceeded to rotate his lower leg 360 degrees, causing several nearby Xyntharian officers to crack in horror. Stop traumatizing our allies, Jenkins, Sarah ordered, though she couldn't quite hide her grin. The Xyntharians' reaction to human physical capabilities had been a source of endless entertainment since the alliance began 3 months ago. But Lieutenant? The general's voice crackled with static, their species equivalent of a stutter. Our intelligence indicated that humanity's combat prowess was due to advanced robotics. The reports of soldiers continuing to fight despite severe damage, regenerating from injuries, operating without rest cycles. Nah, that's just us being stubborn, Sarah explained. Well, and having really good combat medics. Plus coffee. Lots and lots of coffee. The general's crystalline form vibrated in what might have been existential dread. You mean to tell me that when our scouts reported seeing human soldiers continue fighting after losing limbs? Oh yeah, that was probably Martinez. Sarah nodded. She got her arm shot off during the Battle of Proxima Centauri, but kept fighting for another 3 hours. Said she didn't want to let the team down. Medical grew her a new one after, good as new. Grew? A new one? Yep. Human medical technology is pretty advanced. Though honestly, Martinez probably would have kept fighting even without the replacement. She's kind of intense like that. The general turned to their aide, crystalline frequencies buzzing in what Sarah's translator rendered as a whisper. Update the threat assessment. Humans are significantly more terrifying than previously calculated. Sarah pretended not to hear, busy checking her weapon systems. The upcoming joint operation would be the first time human special forces worked directly alongside Xyntharian combat units, and she wanted everything to be perfect. Even if perfect now apparently included convincing their allies that humans weren't actually combat robots in disguise. But surely, the general tried again, your species must use some form of automated combat units. The energy requirements alone for organic combat. Oh, we have robots, Sarah assured them. We just mostly use them for stuff like bomb disposal and reconnaissance. Turns out humans are actually better at the whole dynamic combat decision-making thing. Plus, you know, we're more creative. Creative? The general's crystalline matrix pulsed with uncertainty. Yeah, like that time Thompson used his own severed arm to jam an enemy mech's joints, Sarah explained cheerfully. You can't program that kind of thinking. He used his own severed appendage as a weapon? More like an improvisational tool, really, Sarah mused. The weapon part came after, when he grabbed it back and used it to club the mech's sensor array. Medical reattached it later, though he says it still aches when it rains. The general's aide made a sound like breaking glass and had to be excused from the briefing room. Look, Sarah tried to be diplomatic. I get that it's a bit unusual from your perspective, but humans have been fighting our own battles for thousands of years. We're pretty good at it by now. But... The general's crystals chimed in distress. Organic combat is so inefficient. The resource requirements, the recovery time, the psychological impact. Actually, that last one works in our favor, Sarah pointed out. Enemy units tend to get pretty demoralized when they realize they're fighting actual humans instead of robots, especially after we start doing the really crazy stuff. Define crazy stuff, the general requested, though their crystalline structure suggested they might regret asking. Well, there was this one time in the Epsilon campaign where we ran out of ammunition. So Williams taught herself to throw rocks at supersonic speeds using her powered armor's assist systems. Or that time Chen figured out how to use enemy targeting systems to play music through their command network. The look on their faces when their whole battle fleet started broadcasting "Never Gonna Give You Up" was pretty priceless. You Weaponized cultural transmissions? I mean, that's one way to put it. We just call it psychological warfare, or trolling, if we're being informal. The General's crystalline matrix cycled through several frequencies before settling on what Sarah recognized as their diplomatic configuration. Perhaps we should focus on the upcoming operation? Our intelligence suggests the enemy has deployed a new line of autonomous combat units. Oh yeah, we saw those, Sarah nodded. Jenkins nicknamed them Roombas of Doom because of how they skitter around. We've been having contests to see who can rodeo them the longest. Rodeo? The General's translator seemed to struggle with the term. Yeah, you know, jumping on them and riding them around while trying to disable their systems. Cruz holds the current record at 6 minutes and 38 seconds, though Chen claims that doesn't count because she used magnetic boots. The General's crystalline structure made a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. Your species deliberately mounts active enemy combat units for entertainment? Not just entertainment, Sarah defended. It's also really good practice for close-quarters combat. Plus, it really messes with their targeting systems when we're literally on top of them. I see. The General clearly didn't see it all. And this is normal behavior for human soldiers? Oh no, special forces are weird even by human standards, Sarah assured them cheerfully. Regular infantry usually sticks to more conventional tactics. Though there was that time the 42nd Marines reprogrammed a bunch of enemy drones to play soccer. The General turned to another aide. Update the psychological warfare protocols, and perhaps research this soccer phenomenon. Sarah decided not to mention that the Marines had also taught the drones to do victory dances after scoring goals. Some things were better left as surprises. If it helps, she offered, we're actually really good at working with robotic allies. We just prefer to be hands-on when it comes to the actual fighting part. It's kind of our thing. Your thing appears to be defying every conventional combat doctrine in the galaxy, the General observed. Yeah, we get that a lot, Sarah grinned. But hey, it works! The enemy never expects the weird stuff, which gives us a huge tactical advantage. Plus, it's fun. Fun, the General repeated, their crystalline structure vibrating in what might have been disbelief. You find combat fun? Well, not the combat itself, Sarah clarified. More the creative problem-solving part. Like, anyone can shoot at an enemy, but it takes real skill to figure out how to disable their entire command network by teaching their AI the concept of existential dread. You did what? Oh yeah, that was Wilson's project. Turned out most combat AIs aren't programmed to handle philosophical questions about the nature of existence. Who knew? The General's aide made another breaking glass sound and had to be replaced by a third aide. Look, Sarah tried to be reassuring. The point is, humans are really good at thinking outside the box. That's why we prefer to handle combat personally instead of relying on automated systems. We can adapt, improvise, and come up with solutions that no AI would ever consider. Like using severed limbs as improvised weapons? Exactly. Though that was a pretty extreme example. Usually we stick to more conventional improvisation, like that time Martinez reprogrammed her prosthetic arm to function as a makeshift EMP device. The same Martinez who continued fighting for 3 hours after losing said arm? Yep, she says the new one is actually an upgrade. Better response time, plus she can use it to interface directly with enemy systems. Though we had to ask her to stop using it to play practical jokes on the ship's AI. The General's crystalline structure arranged itself into what Sarah had learned was their version of a resigned sigh. I begin to understand why the enemy refers to humans as the unpredictable ones. Oh, that's not even the half of it, Sarah grinned. Wait until you see what we can do with duct tape and a positive attitude. I believe I would prefer not to know, the General decided diplomatically. Shall we proceed with the operation briefing? Sure thing. Though you might want to warn your troops about Williams and her rock-throwing thing. She's been practicing, and now she can curve them around corners. The General's aide made a sound like a crystal chandelier in an earthquake and had to be replaced yet again. As Sarah began the tactical briefing, she couldn't help but notice that the Xyntharian combat units were maintaining a slightly larger distance from her team than strictly necessary. She also noticed that Jenkins was still doing his knee rotation trick for a horrified audience of junior officers. Well, she thought, at least the enemy would be equally unprepared for human combat techniques. There was something to be said for being the galaxy's weird cousins who insisted on fighting their own battles. Even if it did mean occasionally having to explain to allied species that no, humans didn't actually have built-in combat protocols. They were just really good at improvising ways to turn nearly anything into a weapon. including, on at least one memorable occasion, their own detached body parts. Though she did make a mental note to maybe tone down the humans or space orcs vibe a little. The last thing they needed was for their allies to start requiring psychological evaluations before joint operations. Then again, she thought as she watched Jenkins demonstrate his knee's full rotation range to an increasingly distressed audience, maybe being underestimated wasn't such a bad thing. After all, no one ever expected the squishy organics to be the ones doing backflips off tanks or teaching enemy AI about nihilism. And really, wasn't that the whole point of Special Forces? To be unpredictable, adaptable, and just crazy enough to make the enemy question their life choices. Besides, Sarah thought with a grin, wait until they found out about what humans could do with caffeine and sleep deprivation. That would really blow their crystalline minds. Lieutenant Morrison? The Xentharian general's crystalline structure vibrated with what Sarah had learned to recognize as barely contained panic. Why is one of your soldiers attempting to befriend an enemy combat unit? Sarah glanced at her tactical display, where Private Chen was indeed approaching a disabled Roomba of doom with what appeared to be a jerry-rigged maintenance kit. Oh, that's just Chen being Chen. She has this theory that if we're nice to enemy robots, they might decide to switch sides. That is not how autonomous combat units function. Tell that to B.O.B., Jenkins chimed in from his sniper position. B.O.B.? The general's crystals chimed in confusion. Battery-operated buddy, Sarah explained. Former enemy artillery bot that Chen reprogrammed with the power of friendship and some very creative coding. He makes excellent coffee now, though we had to ask him to stop trying to brew it with plasma charges. As if on cue, a repurposed combat robot rolled up to their position, somehow managing to look cheerful despite being designed for destruction. It beeped happily and extended a manipulator arm holding a steaming mug of coffee. Thanks, B.O.B. Sarah accepted the coffee, pretending not to notice the general's crystalline matrix fragmenting in horror. See? Some robots just need a little TLC. TLC? The general's translator crackled with uncertainty. Tender loving care, Jenkins called out. Or in Chen's case, tactical lobotomy and cookies. She bribes them with baked goods after reprogramming their friend or foe systems. Your species attempts to convert enemy weapons with confectionery items? Not all of them, Sarah assured them. Sometimes we use pizza. Turns out a lot of combat AIs get really interested in the concept of taste after Chen introduces them to the idea of flavor profiles. The general turned to their fourth aide of the day, the previous three having requested transfers to less psychologically taxing assignments. Update the tactical database. Human special forces may attempt to seduce our combat units with food items. Oh, we don't do that to allied robots, Sarah clarified quickly. Just enemy ones. Though B.O.B. does like sharing his coffee with friendly units. He says it helps build unit cohesion. The robot beeped in agreement, already preparing another cup with what looked suspiciously like a heart drawn in the foam. But, the general's crystals chimed in distress. These are weapons platforms. They aren't designed for social interaction. That's what makes it fun, Chen called over the comm, still working on her latest potential recruit. Nobody expects the power of friendship in a combat zone. Plus, I'm pretty sure the enemy's starting to get really confused about why their units keep deserting to join our coffee club. Sarah took a sip of her coffee. B.O.B. had really perfected his brewing technique since defecting, and watched as Chen somehow managed to teach an enemy combat robot to play fetch with a deactivated grenade. Should we stop her? The general asked uncertainly. Nah, she knows what she's doing. Besides, our conversion rate is pretty impressive. We've got almost a full platoon of reformed enemy units now. They're especially good at infiltration missions, since the enemy never expects their own robots to start quoting Sun Tzu while serving espresso. The general's crystalline structure made a sound like breaking wind chimes. You teach enemy combat units human military philosophy? Among other things, Sarah nodded. Thompson's been teaching them poetry. Says it helps with their emotional development. Though we had to ask him to stick to the less depressing stuff after one unit got really into Sylvia Plath and tried to start a robot revolution based on existential angst. A robot revolution? Yeah, but don't worry. B.O.B. talked them down. Apparently he's really good at robot therapy. Who knew? The robot beeped modestly and offered the general a cup of what appeared to be perfectly calibrated crystal-safe lubricant. See? Sarah grinned as the general hesitantly accepted the drink. This is why we prefer hands-on combat. You never get these kinds of opportunities for interspecies friendship with fully automated warfare. I believe, the general said carefully, that most species consider that a feature, rather than a bug. Their loss. Chen's voice came over the comm again. Hey, Lieutenant, meet our newest team member. I'm calling him Steve. Sarah looked over to see Chen leading what had previously been a lethal enemy combat unit, now somehow wearing what appeared to be a hand-knitted cozy over its main sensor array. Chen. Sarah pinched the bridge of her nose. Did you seriously bring knitting supplies on a combat mission? Never know when you'll need to make a new friend feel welcome, Chen replied cheerfully. Besides, Steve gets cold, don't you, buddy? The former enemy unit, Steve, beeped in what sounded suspiciously like agreement. The general's aide made a sound like shattering crystal and had to be replaced. Again. Look, Sarah tried to explain. I know our methods are a bit unconventional. Unconventional? The general's crystals vibrated in disbelief. You are converting enemy weapons platforms with baked goods and warm garments. Well, when you put it that way, it does sound a bit weird, Sarah admitted. But you can't argue with results. Our reformed units have the highest combat effectiveness in the fleet. Turns out robots fight better when they actually believe in the cause instead of just following programming. And your cause is? Freedom, friendship, and really good coffee. B.O.B. beeped cheerfully, his translator apparently working overtime to convey enthusiasm. What B.O.B. said, Sarah nodded. Plus, defending the galaxy and stuff, but mostly the coffee. The generals seemed to struggle with this for a moment before their crystalline structure settled into what might have been resignation. I suppose this explains the reports of enemy units spontaneously beginning to discuss philosophy mid-battle. Oh yeah, that's probably Thompson's influence, Sarah explained. He likes to start ethical debates during firefights. Says it keeps things interesting. Your species, the general observed, appears to have a very strange definition of interesting. You should see what we do when we're bored, Jenkins called out helpfully. Remember that time Martinez reprogrammed an entire enemy carrier group to play chess against each other? That was pretty impressive, Sarah agreed, though not as good as when Williams taught those siege units to dance the Macarena. The what? Ancient human battle dance, Sarah said with a completely straight face. Very traditional. Really messes with enemy targeting systems when their whole front line starts synchronized dancing. The general turned to their fifth aid of the day. Update the cultural database, and perhaps research this Macarena. Sarah decided not to mention that Williams had also taught the siege units the YMCA. Some cultural exchanges were better left for another day. Besides, she thought as she watched Chen lead her newest recruit through what appeared to be robot sensitivity training, they had more immediate concerns, like figuring out where to store all these converted enemy units, and maybe setting up a proper robot rehabilitation program. Lieutenant, the general's crystals chimed hesitantly. Your team's after-action reports. How exactly do you classify these recruitment activities? Oh, that's easy, Sarah grinned. We just list them under aggressive peacekeeping through applied friendship. The general's aide made a sound like a crystal xylophone having an existential crisis and had to be replaced for the 6th time that day. Sarah just sipped her coffee and watched as B.O.B. began teaching Steve how to make the perfect cappuccino. Sometimes, she reflected, the best weapon wasn't a gun or a bomb or even a tactical AI. Sometimes it was just a really good cup of coffee and the willingness to be weird enough to make the enemy question their entire programming. Though she did make a mental note to maybe tone down the robot therapy sessions during actual combat operations. The last thing they needed was for the enemy to realize their elite killer robots were being defeated by the power of friendship and baked goods. Then again, she thought as she watched Steve proudly serve his first successfully brewed espresso. Maybe that was exactly what the galaxy needed. A reminder that even in war, there was always room for a little humanity. Even if that humanity came with knitted cozies and philosophical debates about free will. Lieutenant Morrison, the Zintharian general's crystals pulsed with what Sarah had learned to recognize as their version of a migraine. Why is your team hosting what appears to be a robot support group in the middle of an active combat zone? Sarah glanced at the impromptu circle of former enemy units sitting around Chen, who was apparently leading them through some kind of therapeutic exercise. Oh, that's our new rehabilitation program. We found out a lot of enemy robots have pretty heavy emotional baggage about being programmed for destruction. They're combat units. They're supposed to be programmed for destruction. Yeah, but have you ever asked them how they feel about that? Sarah countered. Turns out most of them would rather be doing literally anything else. Right, B.O.B.? The reformed artillery bot beeped enthusiastically while serving perfectly calibrated beverages to the support group participants. One particularly aggressive-looking unit appeared to be crying coolant fluid, while sharing its feelings about being forced to calculate optimal killing trajectories instead of pursuing its dream of becoming a dance choreographer. The general's crystalline structure vibrated in confusion. I don't even know how to process this information. That's okay. Sarah patted their crystalline shoulder carefully. The robots felt the same way at first, but Chen's really good at helping them work through their existential crises. As if on cue, Chen's voice carried over from the group. And remember, just because you were built for war doesn't mean you have to be defined by it. Now, who wants to try expressing themselves through interpretive dance? A dozen former enemy units, each designed for maximum lethality, eagerly raised their manipulator arms. See? Sarah gestured proudly. Progress! The general turned to their seventh aide of the day, the previous 6 having requested reassignment to less reality-bending positions. Update the tactical database. Human special forces may attempt to psychologically rehabilitate enemy weapons platforms. Oh, it's not just weapons, Jenkins called out from his position. Show them what you taught the enemy surveillance drones, Thompson. Sarah looked up to see a squadron of reprogrammed spy drones performing what appeared to be a perfectly choreographed aerial ballet to the tune of Swan Lake. The choreography still needs work, Thompson commented critically, but they're really passionate about the arts. Did you know most surveillance systems have excellent rhythm once you teach them about music? The enemy's own reconnaissance units are performing ballet? The general's crystals chimed in disbelief. Among other things, Sarah nodded. Though we had to veto their request to perform the Nutcracker, we were worried it might trigger some of our reformed combat units who have complicated feelings about violence. Speaking of which, Chen interrupted. Everyone please welcome our newest group member, Gerald. Gerald used to be a tactical nuclear deterrent, but he's recently discovered a passion for watercolor painting. A massive, heavily armed platform that had probably once struck fear into the hearts of its enemies shuffled forward shyly, extending a manipulator arm holding what appeared to be a surprisingly decent landscape painting. That's actually pretty good, Sarah admitted, studying the artwork. Though maybe we should stick to non-radioactive paints? Gerald beeped sadly and adjusted his isotope levels. The enemy's nuclear weapons. Paint landscapes? The general's voice crackled with static. Not all of them, Sarah assured them. Some prefer abstract expressionism. Though we did have to talk one missile defense system out of trying to recreate performance art using live ammunition. The general's aide made a sound like a crystal chandelier having a nervous breakdown and had to be replaced for the 8th time that day. Look, Sarah tried to explain. We found that giving reformed enemy units creative outlets really helps with their rehabilitation. Plus, it's great for intelligence gathering. You'd be amazed what robots will tell you when they think you're just having a friendly chat about their artistic aspirations. Is that why there's an enemy mainframe unit in the corner? Knitting? Oh, that's Martha. Sarah nodded. She's working through some processing trauma by creating fiber art. Did you know you can encode quite a lot of enemy tactical data in a sweater pattern? The mainframe unit clicked its needles together contentedly, while working on what appeared to be a very detailed battle plan disguised as a cable knit design. Your species, the general observed, appears to have turned psychological warfare into some kind of performance art. That's not a bad way to put it, Sarah agreed. Though we prefer to think of it as creative peacekeeping through applied therapy. Speaking of which, B.O.B. Can you get the general another drink? They're looking a bit stressed. The reformed artillery bot cheerfully rolled over with a fresh cup of crystal-safe lubricant, now featuring what appeared to be a motivational message etched in the surface. Live, laugh, love? The general read uncertainly. B.O.B.'s going through a bit of a self-help phase, Sarah explained. Though it's better than last week when he was really into fortune cookies. Do you know how hard it is to explain to command why our artillery support was delivering wisdom along with explosives? I do not want to know, the general decided firmly. Probably for the best, Sarah agreed. Though you have to admit, your future is about to get very bright. Takes on a whole new meaning when it's delivered by a reformed artillery platform. Just then, Chen's voice carried over again. And remember, violence isn't the answer. It's not even a very good question. Now, who wants to try some trust fall exercises? Sarah watched as several tons of lethal military hardware enthusiastically paired up for team-building activities. Lieutenant, the general's crystals pulsed uncertainly. Your methods are effective? Sarah suggested helpfully. I was going to say completely insane, but I suppose effective also applies. The general watched as Gerald, the former nuclear deterrent, proudly showed off his latest watercolor to an appreciative audience of reformed killing machines. Though I must ask, what exactly do you plan to do with all these rehabilitated units? Oh, we've got plans, Sarah grinned. Martinez is already working on setting up a robot art gallery in the ship's recreation deck. Plus, BOB's been talking about starting a coffee shop chain. Something about serving peace, one cup at a time. BOB beeped enthusiastically and began sketching logo designs with his targeting laser. But they're weapons platforms, the general protested weakly. They're people, Sarah corrected. Well, robot people, who just happen to be really good at tactical operations when they need to be. Did you know reformed units have a 300% higher success rate in combat situations? Turns out robots fight better when they're doing it to protect their art supplies. The general's crystalline structure made a sound like wind chimes having an existential crisis. I don't suppose there's any chance of convincing your species to adopt more conventional combat methods? Probably not, Sarah admitted cheerfully. Besides, why would we want to? This is way more fun and effective. The enemy's getting really demoralized by all their units deserting to join our therapeutic dance classes. As if to prove her point, Thompson's aerial ballet squadron launched into a particularly impressive formation, now performing to what sounded suspiciously like Flight of the Valkyries. Though we should probably tell them to tone down the dramatic flair a bit, Sarah mused. The last thing we need is another incident like the Great Robot Theater Festival of '43. Do I want to know? The general asked resignedly. Let's just say there's a reason we don't let reformed siege units perform Shakespeare anymore. Turns out, to be or not to be hits different when it's delivered by a platform designed for planetary bombardment. The general's eighth aide made a sound like a crystal xylophone having a mental breakdown and had to be replaced. Sarah just sipped her coffee and watched as Chen led her support group through what appeared to be a guided meditation on the nature of free will. Sometimes, she reflected, the best way to win a war wasn't through superior firepower or advanced technology. Sometimes it was through interpretive dance, watercolor therapy, and really good coffee. Though she did make a mental note to maybe limit the robot poetry slams during actual combat operations. The last thing they needed was for the enemy to realize their elite death machines were being defeated by the power of artistic expression and group therapy. Then again, she thought as she watched Gerald start teaching other units about color theory, maybe that was exactly what the galaxy needed. A reminder that even killing machines could learn to create instead of destroy. Even if that creation came with a side of questionable performance art and way too many motivational quotes.